and 2, the two towers. 4 things that are really important. One is that there was molten steel below the towers that stayed molten for weeks after 9/11. How could that possibly be the case if it was just the planes with kerosene, basically something like kerosene, jet fuel, like kerosene, which doesn't burn very hot, and it was hitting at the top of the building? How could there possibly be molten steel that lasted a week? I mean, really hot molten steel for weeks at the bottom, at the base of the tower. That's point 1. Point 2 is that the day after 9/11, 500 and some firefighters gave verbal testimony. It was tape recorded about their experience of the days before. The New York Times filed suit to try and get it. It took a long time. It finally came out in August of 2005. David Ray Griffin has looked at the testimony. He came to the conclusion, without doing numbers, came to the conclusion that the testimony is consistent with a controlled with explosions implying controlled demolition. Somebody after that, namely Professor McQueen at Hamilton College, Hamilton, Canada, went through and made an exact calculation with his criterion and found out that 118 of those firefighters said something that was consistent with explosions going off before the towers collapsed, and 10 firefighters said something that's consistent with the official story. And there was a ratio of about 11 to 1. Okay? That's the second piece of evidence. The third piece of evidence I want to mention is that there's a seismograph station, I don't remember where it is, but relatively close, and they saw that there was a vibration of the earth, and it was, I think if I remember correctly, 17 seconds before the South Tower collapsed that there was vibration of the earth. Okay, so the vibration would have occurred, you would expect when the collapse happened. It happened before, that's suggesting there was some kind of charges that went off. And a lot of people have reported explosions in the basement levels. For example, William Rodriguez was one of those people, but there's many people that reported explosions going off in the base of the towers. That's the third piece of evidence. The fourth piece of evidence is that we now know that there was nanothermate in the dust that came out of the towers. We found that out because there was huge amounts of dust. Some people collected the dust. One of the people who collected the dust was a woman named Janet McKinney, who now lives in Oakland. I know her personally, okay? I'm saying that's important because whoever got a hold of dust, I want to trust that it's an honest person who handed the dust to the scientist. So I'm confirming that she's an honest person, okay? And she gave the dust, and several other people did, and they found these really small particles of thermate material, which is called nanothermate. It's a military-grade explosive in the dust. Okay, so that's 4 pieces of evidence about the World Trade Center. 1 and 2 suggesting it was demolished intentionally ahead of time. Now, having said that, then I'll turn to World Trade Center 7. This comes out of a DVD. I have about 25 copies of it if anybody wants it. It's called 9/11 Mysteries. I've extracted it from it. If anybody wants the DVD, I have 25 copies to give away.
Never before in the history of the world.
George Bush Sr., who was then about to become the head of the CIA, enthusiastically endorsed this idea and gave a speech at that conference advocating precisely the type of war on terror that his son implemented in 2001. After the CJIP conference, the one in Jerusalem, Israel modeled how to implement this so-called war on terror. It planned a preemptive invasion of Lebanon called Peace for Galilee to secure its hold over the occupied territory. The pretext incident and the 1982 invasion itself hauntingly foreshadowed the 9/11 attacks and the Bush War on Terror. In both cases, the terrorist pretext justified preemptive military conquest and long-term occupation of a sovereign country with over 2,600 violations of Lebanese airspace and waters, attempting unsuccessfully to spark a PLO reaction that could serve as a pretext for an Israeli invasion. On June 3, 1982, the Abu Nidal group made an unsuccessful assassination attempt on Israeli Ambassador Shlomo Argov in London. Abu Nidal had been battling the PLO for years. It wasn't part of the PLO, and it has since been exposed as a Mossad-infiltrated front, and it had never even operated in Lebanon. But Israel used this pretext assassination attempt as an excuse to bomb Lebanon. Finally, the PLO responded by shelling West Bank settlements, and Israel used this excuse to launch a full-scale invasion of Lebanon. Israeli troops continued to occupy southern Lebanon for 18 years. Israel also dissolved West Bank elected city councils, dismissed mayors, arrested city employees, and tried to impose puppet governments in the occupied territories. Meanwhile, Netanyahu was continuing his campaign to get the United States to adopt the war on terror idea. Ronald Reagan's cabinet, including George Bush Sr., strongly supported Israel's invasion of Lebanon and the whole idea of a war on terror. But the Democratic Congress and public opinion did not. They wanted a peace dividend. They were tired of the Cold War. So Israel, Netanyahu himself and Shimon Peres and several others came to Washington and lobbied hard to win U.S. support for both the Lebanon invasion and to have the U.S. take leadership in a broader war against so-called international terrorism. The campaign succeeded. The second Jerusalem Conference, which was held in 1984 in Washington, not in Israel, spawned the Reagan Doctrine, in which the U.S. agreed to take the lead in mounting an unprecedented war against international terrorism.
And truth. I think the most important lesson in school or university to our students is always tell the truth.